Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. Today I would like to talk about John Williams' Butcher's Crossing. I mentioned John Williams before and as being who I regard perhaps the greatest American author of certainly the second half of the 20th century, if not the entire 20th century. And I know I'm putting them up against some true giants in the field, but nonetheless, it seems like as each decade rolls by, Williams' reputation as an American author just continues to increase greatly. Even though he didn't write a whole lot, he only left behind, his greatest novel is Stoner, which I've mentioned many times before. In fact, I posted an entire thing about Stoner, the great American novel for sure. And then he also wrote a great work of historical fiction called Augustus, a very different kind of novel, where Williams showed that he could do his research and he knew how to use the information that he found to weave a fascinating story about Rome's first emperor. And then there's Butcher's Crossing, in which Williams goes into an entirely different genre. This is a Western. And yet, again, his genius as a writer. And it's just, I don't know how to describe it, how he's able to do what he does. He's doing what others have done, and yet he just elevates it. I read somewhere recently that Williams never wrote a bad sentence. So in terms of the craft, he's the best. He's the master craftsman. But also just as a storyteller. And, I've poured through his novels many times, and there's magic in there, and I can't quite figure out where it is. By the way, up until recently, this was regarded as his first novel. But it was known that he had written an earlier novel that he would disavow. I just discovered that it is still in print. I very much love to read it. It's called Nothing But the Night. And it's a very short work. I don't know much more about it than that. In fact, I did notice that New York Review of Books does have a version of it, which I would like to read. I think I'm going to latch onto that pretty soon. But anyway, this one is what I want to talk about now. It was recently made into a movie, a major motion picture. That's what that thing is. Let's take that out of there. I don't know anything about the movie. I suspect it didn't do very well. It came out a few years ago. I don't care about that. This is BookTube, right? So let's talk about the book. It's a story of a small group of men who go on a buffalo hunt. They're hunting the buffalo to take the pelts and then bring the pelts back. This was quite a lucrative venture at the time. The story takes place late 19th century, and to bring back buffalo pelts and then sell them on the market, you could get quite a return for your investment. It's quite a lucrative operation, and it did take a certain skill set to accomplish this. And so the story is about this group of men that undergo a buffalo hunt. What Williams does in Butcher's Crossing, though, he elevates what might have descended into, dude bro fiction, to use a term that I think Steve Donahue created. He takes a story that could have been that, and he elevates it into high literature. In other words, there are extended passages in here that talk about how the buffalo hunters make their own bullets. There's a long section in here that explains how to skin a buffalo. Another thing about how to hunt a buffalo, how to survive in the mountains in harsh climates. And it goes into some detail about this, but it's not simply a recitation of these things. It's part of the story. In fact, the section, as an example, the section in here about how to skin a buffalo, it's one of the more seasoned buffalo hunters explaining to a young man who's never done this before, this is how you do it. And in the process, the man, he cuts his fingers, and the young man is reeling from the stench of it all. It's a section of the book that explains skinning a buffalo, but at the same time revealing things about the characters who are involved in this activity. And it's very powerful, and it's interesting. And the characters who are doing these things, they're not supermen. They're not even superhuman in their abilities. I think dude bro fiction, they would be supermen. But in this, none of them are. and they make lots of mistakes, and these are real flesh and blood characters. There's none of the machismo that you would find, say, in an Ernest Hemingway novel. These characters are very believable. They're likable. Sometimes they're quite brave, other times frightened, they're confused. Sometimes they're very clever, other times they make some remarkably foolish mistakes. This is a story of very believable, really, what's the word I'm looking for? Fictional characters, but rendered in real life terms. These are not dude bros. These are men going about their job, suffering for it, and hoping to be rewarded for it at the end. And you know, it's very interesting. The tensions in this novel, and all novel has to have its tension. The tension doesn't arrive. The tension isn't there between the men. Okay. In fact, the men get along pretty well together. There's occasional moments where they kind of rub each other the wrong way, but they quickly resolve these things because they realize they're going to be together for months and months and months, and they just have to get along together during that time. And the tension doesn't come from any strangers they meet on the trail. They do encounter some people on the trail, but they never interact with them. You know, they'll see another group of buffalo hunters in the distance, or something like that, or some travelers in the distance. There's never really any interaction there at all. The tension here in this tale is between the men and nature, and the men and the buffalo that they're hunting, the men and the wildlife, and the changes in climate, and the dangers and the snowstorms and the freezing cold and the drought and the blistering heat and these other unpredictable things. That's where the tension comes from. And that's what elevates this novel. I think if the tension had been developed between the men, or say they encountered some, highway robbers or something, and there's a big shootout or something like that. There's none of that. But had there been, it would have cheapened the story. Or maybe not cheapened it, it would have brought it down to the level of just maybe some really entertaining fiction, but not a work of literature. But, Williams is aiming for something higher, and he succeeds. He hits the mark. He creates an actual work of literature. There are three parts to the novel. The first part sets the stage, as first parts always do. You learn the characters, you understand the context. You hear about negotiating for the price of pelts. The guy who emerges as the leader of this group is talking to a trader, and he says, well, if you bring in this many pelts, I can give you this much, and be back by a certain time, and all the rest of that. The second part of the novel, by far the longest part, the longest section, is a soaring triumph of literature. It's the buffalo hunt itself. It is amazing. I've never read anything quite like it. This is one of those rare books that when you finish reading it, your memory of the book isn't of having read the book, it's of having experienced what's described in the book. I finished this thing, I felt like I needed a shower, as if I'd been on a buffalo hunt. It's amazing, and it's just astounding. It's a true literary triumph. The three part. Oh, and the third part of the book, it's like watching the sun go down on a day that you don't want to end. But it's also elegiac. It's haunting. It's sad. It's the end not only of a story but of an era. These characters who were involved in the hunt, they have something of a meta moment. Like they realize that it's all over, and they just that's the end of their story. I don't know what else to say about this. Compared to some of the other great writers of the Western genre, say from 1950 onwards, this book was first published in 1960. Excuse me. Some of the other great writers from that time, Louis L'Amour, one of my favorites. And I think if he had tried a little harder, he might have accomplished what Williams did. Cormac McCarthy, if Cormac McCarthy hadn't been so self-indulgent. Or Larry McMurtry, who wrote Lonesome Dove and some other really good Westerns. He always had a tendency to drive his stories with traditional melodrama. Williams succeeds where these other guys just fell short. He succeeds in creating a literary masterwork. Butcher's Crossing. I strongly recommend it. That's what I've got for you today. Happy reading. Stay strong.